The coffee was cold, but my hands were shaking anyway. I had just sat down. It was Sunday, the day that used to mean warmth and family. Now, it was just the scheduled time for my humiliation. I always knew Sarah was calculating. I raised her to be smart. But somewhere along the line, the smart calculation turned into cold cruelty. She didn't even wait for me to take a bite of the pastry I baked for her. "Mother," she started. Her voice was too loud for the small dining room. It carried that hard, professional edge she used in her office. Never the voice she used for me when she needed a lift to the airport. "This house," she said, waving a hand vaguely toward the solid oak door that held 70 years of my history inside it. "It's too much for you." I paused. I looked at the wallpaper I picked out after George died. I remembered how Sarah insisted on the ugly gray trim, years ago. I kept silent. I learned long ago that silence was the only armor I had left. "It's not just the upkeep," she continued, impatient with my lack of reply. "It's capital, Mother. Wasted capital. It's tying up our future." Our future. She meant her future. I paid off this house 45 years ago. Every mortgage payment was blood, sweat, and cheap tuna dinners. George and I sacrificed everything to ensure she would have a secure base, a home to always return to. Now that home was simply capital that needed to be unlocked. "I am perfectly fine here, Sarah," I finally managed. My voice was quiet, a little dry. "I would not beg." She sighed dramatically, that particular sigh that elders know well, the sound that means, "You're being difficult and irrational, and I am far too busy for this." "Mother, be reasonable," she said, leaning forward, her expensive jewelry clicking against the glass table. "The market is peaking. If we sell now, we can secure you a nice little apartment, something manageable, on the first floor." I knew what nice little apartment meant. It meant a sterile box, far away from the garden I tended every spring. It meant being packed away like an antique doll, only to be taken out for show on holidays. "And where would you go?" I asked, looking directly into her eyes. I needed to know the depth of her plan. "Oh, we wouldn't go anywhere," she smiled, thin and sharp. "The sale proceeds would cover my down payment on a new development, the one near the lake, and your small unit." The truth landed like a physical blow. She wasn't suggesting we relocate. She was suggesting I liquidate my assets, my life, to fund her luxury, and then she would tuck me into a corner with whatever change was left over. I felt the familiar burning in my chest. It was the injustice, the sheer, unadulterated disrespect. "This is my home, Sarah," I repeated, slow and steady. "I am not selling." The smile vanished. Her face went hard. It was the face of a creditor who had just been denied payment. "You don't understand the reality of the situation," she hissed, lowering her voice but making it more dangerous. "I'm your legal representative now. We talked about this after your fall last year. The power of attorney is signed. The POA. The document I signed when I was groggy and scared, thinking it was just to pay bills if I broke my hip again. The document I signed because I believed my daughter loved me. I am still lucid, Sarah," I countered. "I make my own decisions. Legally, we could argue that," she shot back instantly. "But practically, Mother, who is going to take care of you? Who will manage this huge property? I have a career. I have a family." Her words weren't a plea for help. They were a threat, a guarantee that if I didn't comply, she would invoke her authority and sell the house out from under me anyway. The rest of the conversation blurred into mutual coldness. She mentioned nursing options and streamlining resources. I mentioned the fact that she had not bought me a Christmas gift in 5 years, only sent bills. She left angry, slamming the front door harder than I had ever heard it slammed before. I sat in the silence for a long time. The house felt suddenly immense and terribly vulnerable. She would do it. She absolutely would. The desire for the liquid cash in my walls was stronger than any remaining filial duty. But it wasn't just the house. It was the money too. George was meticulous. When he passed, we had 2 major savings accounts. One was solely in my name, a smaller pot for emergencies. The other, the bulk of everything we ever saved, the inheritance, the life insurance payouts, was set up as a joint account with Sarah. "Just in case, Agnes," George had insisted, coughing through his final days. So she can access it for you immediately, so you aren't left stranded by probate. Sarah's name was on the signature card. A simple convenience, a safety measure. A knife now pointed straight at my throat. I got up, moving slowly into the living room. The afternoon sun was pale. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. If she sold the house, that money would go into probate. She would control the entirety of it, distributing a pittance back to me in the form of management fees or care expenses. She would take everything, justifying it by claiming I was incapable. I remembered something she had said to her husband David over the phone last week. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but their voices carried. "It's just a matter of time," she'd whispered, confidentially. "She needs to be moved out before the closing date. Maybe we change the locks this week. Make it simple." Change the locks. The phrase echoed in the quiet air. Lock me out of my own home. The moment of ultimate rejection, to be physically barred from the place I had built my life. I walked to the front door, running my hand over the deadbolt. My fortress, my trap. If she planned to move fast, I had to move faster. I was an old woman, yes, but I was not yet senile. My memory was sharp enough to remember every pin, every account number, every deposit slip tucked away in the fireproof box. I walked to the kitchen and made a fresh cup of tea. I needed clarity. I needed a strategy that was just as cold, just as calculating as Sarah's. She wanted to teach me what poor meant by leaving me dependent on her scraps. But Sarah had fundamentally misunderstood one thing about her mother. I was the keeper of the treasure map, the joint account, the big one, the one with the bulk of George's life insurance and our investment capital. It held nearly $750,000. I had access. She had access. But who would get there first? It was a race, a silent, terrifying race against my own child. I went to my small home office, the desk where George used to pay the bills. I opened the middle drawer, pulling out the worn leather folio. Inside were the bank statements. I studied the joint account balance. The number was vast, beautiful, and utterly fragile. One signature, one wire transfer, and it could disappear from my control forever, swept up by Sarah's financial planning. I needed to secure my dignity. I needed a cushion. I needed to ensure that when she finally tried to lock me out, I had already removed the floor beneath her feet. I thought about calling my lawyer, but lawyers cost time and money, and Sarah had already demonstrated she was willing to fight dirty and fast, leveraging the POA. No, this needed to be a precise, surgical strike. Before the conversation about the house sale even started to solidify into legal action, the money had to be gone. I opened my laptop. It was slow, but reliable. I logged into the bank's website. My hands were shaking again, but this time, not from fear, from adrenaline. I clicked on the transfer tab. I looked at the destination account options. I had my emergency savings account, the private one, solely in my name, established before Sarah was even born. It was small, but safe. I typed in a small amount first, $500, a test transfer, just to make sure the system worked, and that Sarah hadn't already changed the security settings or initiated a freeze. I hit submit. The screen immediately flashed green. Transfer complete. A rush of cold, terrifying excitement flooded me. It was done. The first drop of the dam had been released. I closed my eyes for a moment. This felt momentous. It was the moment I stopped being the passive, grieving widow and became the protector of my own survival. I knew this act would unleash a storm of fury and accusation from Sarah. She would call me a thief. She would threaten legal action. She would accuse me of every selfish motive she herself harbored. But she couldn't claim I was stealing her money. This was my money, George's legacy, held in trust for me. She was simply a co-signer, a convenience. And convenience could be canceled. I looked at the transfer screen again. $500 was nothing. I needed the whole amount, every single penny that stood between me and a lifetime of dependence on her cold charity. The house was the key to Sarah's future. The money was the key to mine. I took a deep breath. I clicked back to the transfer page. I found the balance again. $762,455.12. I typed the full number into the transfer box. I would not leave her a dime of George's money in that shared account. Not when she was planning to use her power to lock me into poverty. I paused, hovering the cursor over the finalize button. I could hear the clock ticking loudly in the quiet room. I knew that once this button was pressed, the war would officially begin. I needed to finalize this transfer, and then I needed to call Mr. Harrison, the locksmith, first thing tomorrow morning. Because if Sarah thought she could change the locks on me, she was about to find out that the truly valuable lock I intended to change was the one on her financial access. The money was coming out. All of it. Before she could make good on her threat to discard me. I held my breath, preparing to click the button, deciding that financial survival mattered more than her good opinion. Tomorrow, when she woke up, she would be trying to finalize the details of my eviction. And I would be the only one who knew that the bank accounts were already singing a different tune. I just needed to hit send. And then the real planning could begin. They say betrayal starts small, a whisper of neglect. But when it's your own child, it feels like a tidal wave crashing inside your chest. Sarah had seen the house, our family home for 40 years, not as a sanctuary, but as an asset, a future lump sum. Her voice, usually demanding, had softened the day she presented the plan. She called it restructuring. I knew it was erasure. Mom, it's too much upkeep for you. We need to sell now while the market is high. You can move into that nice assisted living place, closer to us. Closer to them meant far away from everything I knew. I looked at the wallpaper I'd chosen. I touched the worn kitchen counter where I taught her how to bake. It all screamed, mine. And she was trying to take the foundation of my life. She wanted me to pack up my memories and trade them for a sterile, small room, waiting to die. But the real shock wasn't the eviction threat. It was the access. Years ago, my husband, God rest his soul, had set up every account as joint with right of survivorship, standard procedure. It was for convenience, for trust. Sarah knew this. She had reminded me of the joint status often, casually, always talking about how easy it would be if something happened to me. The irony was crushing. She thought she was waiting for me to fade so she could access the money. She didn't realize that the moment she drew the battle lines, she gave me the key to the armory. I sat at the old oak desk. In the study late that night, the screen glowed blue against the black window. My hands trembled, but my mind was ice. I checked the main checking account first. The monthly contributions were substantial. Money from my pension, my investments, and the small inheritance from my sister. Our money. But Sarah had been using it too. Small transfers to her account, labeled vaguely. Home repairs, insurance premiums for her car, Christmas prep, starting in August. Not huge amounts that would trigger an immediate alert, but steady, leaching withdrawals. She wasn't just planning to discard me. She was already treating my savings as supplemental income. The rage was quiet, deep, and purifying. I didn't rush. I planned this like a chess game. A slow, systematic checkmate. I started with the liquid funds. The everyday savings account we use for utilities and groceries. It held just over $50,000. I moved it to a new online bank I opened under my sole name. An account she knew nothing about. The transfer took seconds. My heart pounded with a mix of terror and exhilaration. It felt heavy, like I was moving actual bricks of gold. Next was the money market fund. This was the big one, the nest egg. What we had saved for decades, meant for medical emergencies or securing my future should the worst happen. It held the bulk of the money, several $100,000. Transferring that required multiple steps, wire confirmations, and security codes. I spent 2 full hours on the phone, speaking to automated voices, pretending to be distracted if Sarah walked into the room. I told her I was ordering a new gardening tool. She barely grunted, too busy looking at her phone. She didn't even wonder why I was speaking in whispers. She just assumed I was being a doddering old woman, fiddling with something unnecessary. That assumption was her undoing. I moved the money in segments. I created new passwords for the wire transfers that only I would understand. Passwords based on memories she had forgotten or never knew existed. The silence of the house during those nights was deafening. Every click of the keyboard was a definitive step away from the life of comfort and trust I had built. Every transfer was a hammer blow against the pedestal I had kept her on. When the last substantial transfer cleared, the clock read 3:47 a.m. The joint money market fund now showed a balance of $12.43, enough for a single pizza, but certainly not enough for the down payment on the assisted living facility she planned for me. I printed every single confirmation slip. I didn't want digital proof that could be erased. I folded them neatly and placed them in a heavy, waterproof box hidden beneath my loose floorboard, alongside my old passport and my husband's military tags. I felt physically lighter, though I hadn't moved an inch. I was no longer dependent on her good graces. I had reclaimed my freedom, quantified in dollars and cents. The next morning, Sarah bustled around, oblivious. She complained about the cost of gas and mentioned needing to transfer a few $100s from savings to cover her car payment. "Did you talk to the bank about the closing documents for the house, Mom?" she asked, not looking up from her coffee. "Not yet, darling," I replied, sipping my tea slowly. It tasted like victory. "I'm having a hard time grasping all the numbers. I need to spend a little more time reading the fine print." She sighed impatiently. "Mom, there is no fine print. It's a standard sale. Just sign the document when it comes. We need to move fast." She spoke of the sale as a certainty. She spoke of my future without once consulting me. "I will," I promised, and the lie slid easily off my tongue. I had already begun the next phase, the smaller revenge, the closing of the traps. I called the bank that managed the small brokerage account. This was only for emergency funds, tied to the main joint checking. I requested a complete closure and transfer of the remaining balance to my new solo account. I paid the penalty fee happily. I also canceled the joint credit card she used for family groceries. I told the representative I had lost the card. A new one would be sent to my address, under my name only. Sarah's existing card would be useless within 48 hours. I watched her that week, spending money, making plans, talking about the trip she was going to take once the house money came through. She was building a future entirely on quicksand. My quicksand. Every time she used her key to enter my house, I saw the arrogance. She assumed I was frail, confused, easily managed. She assumed I was slow. She had forgotten that before I was a mother, before I was a widow, I was a woman who built this life from nothing, and I knew how to destroy it if necessary. I knew she was setting the date. She was coordinating the new locks, timing the legal notice she planned to serve me, detailing the day she would physically bar me from the house. She wanted to make sure I was truly homeless before she finalized the sale. She couldn't stand the thought of me having the security of these walls while she lived off the profits. I wasn't waiting for her move. I was ready. I secured a small, quiet, efficiency apartment across town, paid 3 months' rent in advance, and began quietly moving the essentials: photographs, my husband's jacket, the heavy box of financial papers, things that truly mattered. I didn't need the antique china or the heavy furniture. She could have the house, stuffed full of things she didn't realize were now debt. I was almost finished with my preparation. All the liquid cash was secure. My future was purchased. Now, all that remained was the performance. I just needed to wait for the day she came home with the eviction notice and the new locksmith. That day, she would find a very different mother waiting for her. A mother who was already financially independent, standing in an empty bank account. The house was cold, but my resolve was colder. The trap was set. All I needed was the right moment to step out and let her fall. I realized that when you are old, time doesn't feel like a line anymore. It feels like a loop. You keep reliving the same days, the same weather, the same quiet neglect. But once I made the decision, the loop broke, the anxiety vanished, replaced by a cold, surgical focus. I had to move faster than she could call the locksmith. The bank required an appointment for the big transfers. I booked one for Monday morning. I didn't tell Sarah I was going. I just said I had a doctor's checkup downtown. She barely looked up from her tablet. Monday was gray and wet. I dressed carefully, in my best coat, the one reserved for funerals and very important appointments. I walked into the main branch of the bank where 50 years of my life had accumulated. I sat across from the young, kind manager. His name was Peter. He kept calling me ma'am and asking if I was sure about the large movements. I was sure. I explained that I was restructuring my retirement funds. That was technically true. I was restructuring my life away from my daughter's control. The process was simple, yet agonizingly slow. We had 4 major accounts linked to Sarah's name, accounts that had been joint for convenience. The household savings, my primary pension payout, the investment portfolio inherited from my husband, and the small emergency travel fund. I focused on the largest ones first. The joint household savings account, which Sarah saw as hers, was the priority. I transferred every penny, save for $100, into a new, discrete account opened in my name only, at a completely separate institution. Peter didn't question the new bank choice. He just needed my signatures. When I signed the papers, my hand was steady. It wasn't anger driving the pen. It was the desperate need for oxygen. The whole thing took 3 hours. 3 hours of polite small talk, 3 hours of watching the numbers move from shared columns to columns labeled solely with my name. When I walked out of that bank, the air felt different. I wasn't just a dependent elder anymore. I was solvent. And more importantly, I was invisible to Sarah's immediate scrutiny. She checked the balances religiously, often on Tuesday mornings after the weekend transactions had cleared. I spent the rest of Monday securing my physical documents. I gathered every insurance policy, every piece of jewelry I truly valued, and the few photos that couldn't be replaced. I packed one small carry-on bag, just in case. I placed the new bank book and my documents in the locked fireproof box my husband had used, tucking it under the loose floorboard in my bedroom closet, a hiding spot Sarah never knew existed. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The house was quiet, but it was my quiet. Tuesday arrived, cold and drizzly, just like the day before. I made my tea, sat at the kitchen table, and watched the clock tick toward 10:30 a.m. This was Sarah's usual time for financial management. I didn't have to wait long. At 10:47 a.m., the first text message arrived. My phone, sitting on the counter, buzzed violently. I didn't pick it up. I watched the caller ID flash Sarah's name, then settle back into darkness. The text was aggressive, all capital letters. "Where is it? What have you done?" I took a slow sip of my tea. It was still perfectly hot. A second text followed instantly, then a third, filled with question marks and incoherent demands. She wasn't asking me. She was accusing me. She wasn't worried about me, her frail mother. She was worried about her next holiday fund. I pressed my lips together. I felt a pang of deep, sickening regret for the daughter she had become, but zero regret for my action. The phone rang again. This time I picked up. I didn't say anything. I just held the phone to my ear, listening to the static and the sound of her heavy breathing. "Mother, answer me. The primary savings account is practically empty. Are you playing some kind of sick joke?" Her voice was shrill, laced with true panic. Not panic for our security, but panic for her perceived loss. "Hello, Sarah," I said calmly. My voice sounded steady, much steadier than hers. "Don't hello, Sarah me. Where did you move the funds? You cannot access those without me." "Oh, but I can, dear," I corrected her gently. "They were joint accounts, remember. And since the majority of the principal originated from your father's pension and life insurance, assets held solely in my name before we merged the accounts for convenience, it was quite simple to move them back into my control." There was a silence on the line. A profound, hollow silence that felt heavier than any argument we'd ever had. You stole it," she whispered. "I secured what was mine." I corrected her again. "I believe I made it quite clear that I've decided to handle my own finances from now on. You told me I was becoming a burden. I am simply lifting that burden from your shoulders. You are going to regret this, Mother. You have crossed a line. I am already regretting many things, Sarah, but this is not one of them. I hung up before she could respond. The sudden finality of the click of the phone was satisfying. It was the sound of a door being shut. I knew she wouldn't stop at the phone call. When money this significant vanished, Sarah's civility, the thin, brittle veneer she used to maintain appearances, would crack instantly. She would be coming for the house next. The house was our last battleground. She owned a minor interest, granted during an estate planning move 10 years ago for tax reasons. But the bulk of the equity, the right to occupancy, and the primary mortgage responsibility remained legally mine. She needed to physically prevent me from accessing the house, or she needed to scare me into signing the deed over to her completely. I looked out the window. It was exactly 11:30 a.m. If she was driving from her office, she would be here in 20 minutes. I walked the perimeter of the house, checking every lock, every window latch. I made sure the spare key that usually hung on a hook by the back door was nowhere in sight. I had discarded it the day before. I went into the living room and sat down on the armchair by the window, the one facing the street. I was waiting for her. Not hiding. Waiting. My heart was beating fast, but my mind was clear. I was ready to defend my home, my dignity, and my future. I didn't have to wait long. I heard the screech of tires outside. She didn't even park the car properly. It was left haphazardly across the driveway entrance. Sarah stormed up the walk. Her face was white with rage and confusion. She didn't bother to knock. She jammed her key into the front door lock. It turned, but the deadbolt was already set from the inside. She tried again, rattling the handle violently. That's when she realized I hadn't just cleaned out the bank accounts. I had also changed the rules of the game. She started pounding on the wood. "Open this door, Mother. Now. We need to discuss what you did." I stood up slowly from my armchair. I walked to the door, placed my hand on the cold wood, and took a deep breath. "You wanted me to be gone, Sarah," I said, loud enough for her to hear through the heavy oak. "But I decided that if I was going to be poor, I would be poor on my own terms. And if I am to be locked out, I will make sure you are locked in here with the consequences." I heard her step back, stunned. The pounding stopped. She knew then that she had completely miscalculated her timing. She had planned to take my dignity. Instead, I had taken her control. But I knew she wouldn't leave. Not yet. She needed to know what the next move would be regarding the house. The house was her final stake. I walked away from the door and back to the kitchen, leaving her standing outside in the cold rain. The real confrontation was about to begin. She would have to decide if she was prepared to fight a mother who had nothing left to lose. The telephone rang exactly 3 times before the line went dead. That was not a coincidence. It meant she hadn't even bothered waiting for the voicemail prompt. The 4th call came less than 10 minutes later. This time, she didn't hang up immediately. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the usual silence of the afternoon. "Mother, what did you do?" I was sitting in my favorite armchair, the one facing the garden where the late afternoon sun hit the rose bushes just right. I picked up the receiver gently. I had rehearsed this moment hundreds of times in the long, dark nights. "Hello, dear," I said, my voice steady, perhaps too steady. "Don't hello, dear me." I was at the closing. Agent's office. The check for the initial deposit bounced. "Bounced, Mother? The house account is empty." I could hear the frantic pacing in her tone, the sheer shock that her carefully laid plans were crumbling before she even had a chance to implement them. The closing agent. So it was true. She was moving fast to sell the house I had worked 30 years to pay for. "The house account?" I asked, pretending a slight confusion. "Oh, you mean the joint checking account? The one we set up purely for convenience when your father passed? The one that had 5 years of rent accumulation and the emergency reserve for the roof. Where is the money, Mother? Over $100,000. Is this some kind of sick joke?" I closed my eyes for a moment, remembering the fear of the last few months, the indignity of having to beg for permission to use my own money. "It is not a joke, Clara," I said slowly. "It is protection." The line went silent for a beat, a dangerous, hollow silence. "Protection from what?" she finally hissed. "Are you telling me you actually moved all that money? Every cent?" I moved my money, yes, I corrected her. Every cent that originated from the sale of my properties, my pension, and your father's life insurance. The money that was put into that account solely for ease of handling household bills, while keeping both our names on it. I heard a sound like glass shattering on her end. Perhaps she was slamming the phone down, or maybe she dropped something valuable. It didn't matter. You stole it, she whispered, the shock turning into pure, cold fury. I protected my assets, I countered. You see, Clara, a joint account does not mean 50-50 ownership of the funds, unless both parties contributed equally to the principal. Since the principal of that account was 100% derived from my life savings, inheritances, and earned income before you were even out of high school. Legally, it was never yours. It was simply accessible to you. She laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. Accessible, yes. And now, inaccessible. Do you realize the position you have put me in? I gave the agent my assurance. The sale is dependent on that deposit. Your assurances are not my problem, dear. Your assurance to me was that I would always have a home here, that I would be cared for, and that my dignity would be respected. Those assurances were broken long ago. She started raising her voice, screaming now about obligations, about filial duty, about all the sacrifices she had made. The typical emotional manipulation. I waited patiently until she paused for breath. You wanted me out, Clara. You were already calculating how quickly you could change the locks, weren't you? You wanted to empty me out and file for guardianship, maybe toss me into a budget facility miles away, then sell this house before Christmas. My heart was hammering, but my grip on the receiver was firm. If I had waited for you to execute your plan, I would have been left with nothing but the clothes on my back and a nursing home bill. I would have been dependent on your generosity, which, as we both know, has a very short lifespan. I heard her breathing heavily, raggedly. She was cornered. You'll regret this, Mother. You just wait. You cannot live alone. You're too old, too frail. Who's going to drive you? Who's going to handle your affairs now that you have decided to cut me out completely? I have new arrangements in place, I informed her smoothly. A financial planner, a trusted lawyer who understands elder law, and a driver who picks me up twice a week for appointments. All paid for, fully secured, and completely independent of you. I allowed the silence to stretch, letting the weight of the realization crush her expectations. She had been so certain of her control, so certain of my fragility. But we were going to share the inheritance from the house sale, she stammered, the greed shining through her shock. You were supposed to be taken care of, but the rest was for me, for my retirement. It's all gone now. Gone? I repeated, echoing her previous accusation. No, it is exactly where it belongs, with the person who earned it. I leaned forward in the chair. It was time for the final thrust. You tried to discard me. You attempted to render me poor, dependent, and homeless. You wanted me to learn what poor means, didn't you? So you could control me entirely. Well, I have learned the lesson, Clara. I learned it early enough to act. Now, I concluded, my voice dropping to a low, deliberate tone, you will learn that lesson too. The money that was supposed to buy your luxury apartment, your expensive trips, and your early retirement, it is gone from your reach. You are now exactly as poor as you were planning to make me. She erupted. She screamed profanities I had never heard her use. She threatened lawsuits, police reports, and immediate action to have me declared incompetent. Go ahead, I encouraged gently. My attorney is ready for your call. Everything is documented. The source of the funds, the dates of withdrawal, and the new secure trustee accounts. It is perfectly legal. You simply mistook access for ownership. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The shouting stopped abruptly. The silence returned, heavier this time, laden with defeat. You will hear from my legal team, she finally choked out, hanging up without a goodbye. I placed the phone back on the cradle. My hand was shaking now, not from fear, but from the immense release of adrenaline. The confrontation was over, and I had won the first, most crucial battle. I didn't move for a long time. The house felt suddenly immense, strangely lonely, yet free. The emotional chain was broken. The satisfaction was profound, but the cost was devastating. I had just destroyed my Relationship with my only child, maybe forever. But was there really a relationship left to destroy? It had been transactional for years. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the gardener was finishing up, trimming the hedges neatly. He was a kind young man I had hired discreetly 2 weeks ago, paying him out of my new separate account. Clara's lawyer would certainly start pulling every financial thread they could find. She would undoubtedly try to challenge the house deed, arguing that since she paid some utility bills over the years, she had equity. I knew the fight was not over. This was merely the first volley. I had secured the immediate assets, but the house itself was the biggest target. I needed to move faster than she could appeal. I pulled out the burner phone I kept hidden in the bottom drawer. I had one call left to make today. It was to the specialist estate lawyer, the one I had consulted weeks ago, who dealt exclusively with elderly parents protecting themselves from predatory heirs. "It's me, Mrs. Eleanor," I whispered into the phone. "The first step is complete. She knows the accounts are drained. Now, we proceed with the next phase, the paperwork for the property transfer. We need to make this house legally invisible to her before the end of the week." The waiting was the hardest part of the plan. I was settled in the temporary apartment. It was small, quiet, anonymous. The window overlooked a busy street, but I kept the curtains drawn. I didn't want to see the world I was hiding from. I had unplugged the main television set. The sound of silence was necessary. It felt like the calm before a very specific storm. I checked my watch again. 7:00 p.m. Clara's routine was predictable. She would be finished with her yoga class. She would drive back to the house, expecting me to be packed and waiting inside, ready for her final humiliating instructions. She expected me to be fragile, to cry, to beg for forgiveness for simply existing in her way. I wasn't there. I had already sent the single cryptic text message hours before. It simply read, "I took steps to ensure my immediate survival. Do not attempt contact until you have checked the balances." I heard nothing for 30 minutes. I imagined the scene. Clara arriving home, the lights off, my bedroom door closed. She would probably assume I was sleeping, or perhaps gone for good. She would feel relief. Then she would try to pay for something online. A new sofa, maybe. For the living room, she was planning to redecorate once I was gone. Or perhaps she would just open the banking app, checking the totals one last time, confirming the wealth she believed was now solely hers. When the notification popped up, transaction declined. Insufficient funds. That is when the quiet would break. The phone rang at 7:37 p.m. It was not a civil phone call. It was a digital transmission of pure, incoherent fury. I let it ring 3 times, enjoying the sound. It was the sound of consequences finally catching up. I answered on the 4th ring. "Mother, what in God's name did you do? The account is empty. Empty. This has to be a mistake, you idiot. Where is the money?" Her voice was shrill, breaking through the polite filter of the mobile service. I held the phone slightly away from my ear, waiting patiently for the first wave of accusations to pass. She accused me of theft. She accused me of madness. She accused me of destroying her future. I took a slow breath, centering myself. I remembered the years of disrespect, the casual insults, the way she had spoken about the nursing home, like it was a prison sentence I deserved. "Are you finished, Clara?" I asked. My voice was low, calmer than I had expected it to be. Silence. She was gasping for air. She wasn't used to me challenging her. She expected me to wilt. "You have 5 minutes of my time," I continued, "and I want you to listen carefully. You emptied everything, every joint account. How could you do this? I needed that money. That was supposed to pay the mortgage for next month." I pressed the tip of my thumb against the receiver. "That is the precise problem, isn't it, Clara? You needed it. You felt entitled to every penny that I earned, every dollar your father and I saved. You saw the money, but you never saw the person who made it." "It was joint. I signed the papers years ago." "Yes, we both signed the papers, which means we both had the right of disposal," I countered, using the exact legal terminology my lawyer had taught me. You felt the right to dispose of me, Clara. I merely disposed of the funds? I heard a thud in the background. She must have dropped something valuable. You have destroyed my life, she screamed. I cannot pay the bills. I have nothing left. The word hung in the air between us. Nothing. That feeling, I said, my voice dropping to a whisper of steel. That sharp, sudden, sickening panic in your gut? That absolute terror when you realize the structure holding up your world is gone? She didn't respond. She just made a small, choked noise. That is what you are planning to inflict upon me, Clara. Only my panic would have been real. I would have been homeless, discarded, facing a lonely, penniless end because my own daughter decided I was too much trouble. This is revenge. No, I corrected her firmly. This is dignity. This is self-preservation. You asked me what poor felt like, didn't you? When you started pricing nursing homes for me? You wanted me to fear being poor. Well, now you have a practical understanding of what being suddenly, unexpectedly destitute means. I paused, letting her digest the full weight of the situation. I knew she was calculating, running the numbers, realizing the millions I had saved were now safely locked away in accounts she could never touch. I have kept enough to survive, comfortably, and to secure the small apartment I am currently residing in, I explained, cold and formal. I am fine. I am safe. I am no longer your burden. She started crying then. Real tears, not the manipulative kind. The tears of pure financial despair. You cannot do this to your own family. I will call the police. I will sue you. You are committing fraud. I almost smiled. My preparation was perfect. You are welcome to try, dear, but I assure you, my legal team is already aware of the situation. I acted entirely within my rights as a co-signer. Furthermore, when your legal threats begin, my lawyer will present evidence of your planned abandonment and financial abuse. I believe that evidence will make a civil suit very difficult for you to pursue. She suddenly switched tactics. The fury evaporated, replaced by desperate pleading. Mom, please, just tell me where you put it. I will give you whatever you want. We can talk about the house. We can fix this. The time for talking has passed, Clara, I stated, closing that door forever. The moment you looked at me and saw only a financial obstacle, not your mother, that is when this conversation ended. I did not give her a chance to argue further. I will only speak to your appointed legal counsel from now on. You have what you worked for, Clara, and I have what I needed to survive. I pressed the end call button. The silence returned to the small apartment, but it was a different silence now. It was the silence of victory. I lowered the phone onto the side table. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline rush of having faced the dragon and walked away intact. The money was safe. I was financially secure for the rest of my life. But the house. The house was still the main structure of the conflict. It was where Clara was currently standing, realizing she was standing in debt. She had hoped to seize it, sell it, and collect the massive profit. I still owned the house entirely. She had no claim on the deed. Yet, I knew she would fight harder for the physical structure than she had fought for my affection. The empty accounts were only the first round. I stood up and walked over to the small kitchen. I needed tea, something hot and calming. The house needed to be dealt with next. I had the documents ready, the documents that would make the final statement about who controlled that property. I knew my next call had to be to the estate attorney, confirming the paperwork was ready to be filed. The legal process was slow, painstaking, and expensive, but it was the only way to ensure she never hurt me again. The fight had been financial, but the next phase would be absolute. The house was the final anchor, and I was preparing to cut the rope entirely. I needed to move fast before she could change the locks on the property itself. I had to file the eviction notice before morning. It was time to make sure that the place where she learned what poor felt like was also a place she wouldn't be able to stay.